Hey there, Pastor Mark here. It's our prayer that this message would encourage and equip you in your relationship with Jesus. We're able to provide this content due to the joyful generosity of our financial partners. And if you'd be willing to join that tribe and help get some sermons like this around the world, you can donate at harvestbaptist.info/give. God bless. Apologies for not making the Memorial Day combining of services announcement a little sooner. Typically would give you 2 or so weeks on that. So we'll do our best to put in the email and even send a text out. And we'll have a few more extra chairs out next week to make that happen. But it'll be fun to have everyone together and to even remember to some degree Memorial Day weekend and the sacrifice that our soldiers have made and continue to make for us, and will be a sweet time. I did, though, promise the first service, next time we go to one service, we're going to do it at 9 instead of 10:45. So I told them we always inconvenience you and we always make you move. So next time, just FYI, put it in the back of your head, you're going to have to go to 9 next time. I don't know what it'll be. It'll probably be a year or something like that, but just so you know. Well, here's where we've been through our series. We're talking about how we change as Christians, and this is the diagram that we're working off of. If there was a river of change or a flow of change, what would that be like? How do you navigate the river of spiritual growth? And it starts with the headwaters. It starts with your faith in Jesus, believing the gospel of Jesus, and then ultimately those headwaters form a body or a channel of the river, the main stem of the river, and that continues to be your faith in Jesus and believing the gospel of Jesus. And we walked through that for several weeks, how that is so paramount for us to have this backbone established properly. Once that is established, you can begin to add in tributaries, as it were, the Spirit of Jesus and the Word of Jesus and the Church of Jesus and the practices of Jesus. All of these things converge to make your Christian life flow as it should, ultimately leading you to the real goal, the mouth of the river. It distributes into you being with Jesus and being like Jesus and joining him on mission. That's the goal of all of discipleship. And we've been stuck for a few weeks on this tributary called the Spirit of Jesus. And we've looked now at who is the Spirit, how do we get him, what does he do in our lives, and now we're going to apply those truths to help us understand in a more profound and robust way what the Spirit of Jesus does for us as a Christian and how he allows us to live in freedom and fruitfulness. And we're going to go to Romans 6, 7, and 8 to do this. Now, these chapters are some of the best in all of the Bible. Some of my favorite authors and people that I listen to and read, John Stott, Timothy Keller, Adrian Rogers, would all say that Romans 6, 7, and 8 is the passage that most transformed their Christian sanctification and being able to live in victory in Jesus. All of them would say, this is the spot, this is the text. And you don't initially get the Spirit of Jesus, but what you find is there are these thoughts in 6 and 7 that build a foundation and ultimately lead you to this deep, beautiful conversation about the Spirit of Jesus. I went through this week these chapters and I highlighted particular words. And I want to show this to you as we dive into these 3 chapters. I went to chapter number 6. And if you don't mind, guys, dim the lights a little bit so we can see this more clearly. I went to chapter number 6, and I began to highlight in green the word law, and in yellow the word sin, and then in blue the word death. And as you can see, there is a ton of sin and death, or dead to sin, over and over and over again in this chapter. I mean, it is just riddled full of death, 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 sin, 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 dead to sin, dead to sin, dead to sin. I mean, just over and over. There's just a smidge of law. You get to chapter number 7, and it begins to look like this. All of a sudden, you have green all over the page now. And now it's not just that we're dead to sin, dead to sin, dead to sin, but all of a sudden we're dead to the law, we're dead to the law, we're dead to the law, we're dead to the law. I mean, just it's so redundant, you almost feel like you're being treated like a kindergartner. It's so repetitious that we're dead to sin, we're dead to law. And then ultimately you get to chapter number 8, and you begin to see new words. And red is spirit, and dark blue is alive or life. And all of a sudden you get this, by the Spirit we're alive to God. And that is, in a nutshell, what these chapters are about. Chapter number 6 is the reality that we are dead to sin. Chapter 7 is the reality that we are dead to the law. And then chapter 8 begins to tell us what we are alive to. We are alive to God by the Spirit. So this is going to be a conversation over the span of several weeks that all kind of meshes together. But I want to begin today in chapter number 6. Most specifically, actually, in chapter number 5, the 2 verses leading up to chapter number 6. So if you don't mind, look at it with me, Romans 5, verse number 20. We're going to learn how we as Christians are dead to sin and what that means. Verse 20, moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. So what this is saying is the simple truth about the law. When we say law, sometimes the Bible refers to like the first 5 books of the Bible as law. Sometimes the 10 Commandments are law. Sometimes law is just morally what you're supposed to do that's right and wrong. We're talking about God's code of conduct in the Old Testament of how we should live our lives, or how the Jewish people should have lived their lives. And it says the law came, and when the law came, sin became more profuse. Sin began to abound. And this is for 2 reasons. One, the law makes you want to sin more. When God says, thou shalt not, there's something in you that says, oh, I shout, right? The thou shalt nots make you want to shout. There's actually a song about that. Makes you want to shout. You know a song? Throw my hands up and, oh, you're good. It's actually S-H-O-U-T. It's not shout, but you know what I'm talking about. The sign that says wet paint, don't touch. You weren't going to touch the wall until it said don't touch. Now you want to touch the wall. Right? There's something in us like that, right? So the law produces in us more sin because we're rebellious. It also reveals sin that we didn't know was there in the first place. I didn't know that was wrong, and all of a sudden I now know. In the same way that you file your taxes and you try to do everything right, at least you should, don't cheat on your taxes, then you're audited. And guess what? Everybody who's ever been audited found out that they did something wrong, because the code is so long and there's so many intricacies, and you find out they're like, oh, I thought I was doing it right, but I messed up there and there and there. All of a sudden this law begins to show you that I messed up there and there and there, and it begins to reveal your sin and name your sin and diagnose your sin. But there's a problem with the law in that it falls short. It only diagnoses, it doesn't heal. And all of a sudden you need something else. You need medicine, and that medicine is called grace. The back half of the verse, but where sin did abound, grace did much more abound, meaning you can't out-sin God's grace. His grace is bottomless. His grace is limitless. His grace has no borders. His grace is like wave after wave after wave. There is an ocean of grace. And even though the law made sin abound, the reality that we have all the sin makes grace that much greater, because grace does much more abound. Verse 21, that as sin has reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Jesus Christ our Lord. Grace now reigns. Sin used to reign, not no more. Grace reigns. Grace has run of the house. Grace is now in control. This is why we started our conversation through the series on the headwaters. We put our faith in Jesus, and the grace of God saves us. It is the grace of God that brings salvation. It is the grace of God that secures us. It is the grace of God that even provides power for sanctification. Grace now reigns. Verse number 14 of chapter 6, kind of same thought. For sin shall not have dominion over you or reign over you, for ye are not under the law but under grace. So what it's saying is, you're no longer under sin, you're under grace. You're no longer under law, you're under grace. Chapter 6 is going to be the sin part. Chapter 7 is going to be the law part. You're no longer under neither of these. You now have grace that reigns. just a little tease of what's to come in chapter number 7 on law and grace, because it's alluded to in chapter number 6, is that you do not want an environment of law. When you have an environment of law, there are two outcomes: perfection or failure. And if you can materialize perfection for some length of time, it's only a matter of time before that perfection becomes failure. And law becomes this, if you're law-driven or you allow law to rule in your life as a Christian, it produces a bunch of Pharisees that are so fixated on the law and keeping the law and them keeping the law, and you have rules for your rules about the rules, and all of a sudden there's this environment that you don't want, because when you have grace, it's attractive and people find you, but when you have law, it is repulsive and people want to get away from you. This is why when you're at a stoplight and the cop car pulls up behind you and the law is now on your tail, or law enforcement is sitting there in your rearview mirror, do you feel uneasy or at rest? Right? Is my seatbelt on? Kids, is your seatbelt on? Is my registration sticker good? Is my tail light out? Did I use my blinker? All these things are running through your head because the law is there. It doesn't make you easy. It doesn't make you comfortable. It doesn't put you at rest. But grace provides an environment where there is rest and there is comfort, and there isn't this expectation of perfection. There is an expectation of progress in Jesus and growing in Jesus, but there isn't this perfection that people feel. And some of you love to live by law. You love rules for your rules, but the people around you feel this. And it makes them uneasy. And it makes it very uncomfortable. And you're like, I don't know why I can't, make friends. I come to church and I shake hands and I go to group. I volunteered for VBS, but no one really, they don't invite me over to their house like they invite other people, and they don't really want to, schmooze with me and make connections. And it's because you make them feel uneasy. You're running around with a ruler in your hand and verses in your mouth, but very little grace in your heart, and people aren't attracted to that. They want to get away from it. So we don't let law reign anymore. Grace now reigns and has control. And the law is good. Chapter 7 will end up asking the question, is the law bad? Because you would think, well, it makes us sin more. Is it bad? No, it's good. It shows us who God is in his holiness. It shows us who we are in our sinfulness. And it shows us our desperate need for a Savior, one who would come and would fulfill the law and die for lawbreakers so that we could now be redeemed and be saved. But that's where the law ends, and grace now steps in and says, all right, law, I'll take it from here. You as the law helped them see that they were guilty, but you're not going to heal them. You're an x-ray that shows there's a problem, but you can only diagnose. You can't heal. I'm grace. I'm taking over. I'm going to heal. And the grace of God, as Titus would say, that brings salvation now comes to us, and that's the fix for our problem. It's grace. But all of this talk of grace leads Paul and those who he's writing to ask a very natural question. Is all of this grace too much? Is God's grace too gracious? Is there a danger in being so grace-oriented? And so here's chapter 6, verse number 1. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Well, God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Verse 15, same question. What then? Shall we sin because we're not under the law but under grace? God forbid. Now, he is posing a very natural question. If there's this fear in people, I'm going to go down here and get my water. There's this fear in people that if you talk of grace, that all of a sudden people are going to say, okay, there's no law, there's no rules, I don't have to obey all of these things, and there's all this grace. No matter how much I sin, no matter what I do, I'm going to have grace for any of that? If I have a pickup load of sin, you're telling me God has a tractor-trailer load of grace? If I have a little pile of sin, God has a mountain of grace? Well, then people are just going to say, I'll do whatever I want. I'll sin when I want, do what I want, feed my flesh, because after all, God's grace is going to be bigger than it. I can never outrun it. I can never out-sin it. It's bottomless. So I'll just keep on sinning and keep on not just using grace, but abusing grace. Right? There's this fear in people that if you get rid of the law and you go grace, that now there's going to be anarchy and there's going to be chaos in the streets and people are going to do whatever they want and it's going to be crazy spiritually. It's going to be this circus, right? We're going to have Christians who are just living carnally, and you're going to have, Mardi Gras meets frat boy party meets whatever, and it's just going to be, crazy. We can't do this grace stuff. And what he says is, if you properly understand grace, you will use it, but you will not abuse it. And the reason you won't abuse it is because God's grace brings salvation. It brings redemption. And when you are redeemed, you understand that you are dead to sin. And that dead to sin actually limits and keeps sin at bay and changes us from the inside out. And it's altogether different. You don't have to worry about all this grace talk. It's not going to be abused. And here is his argument in chapter number 6 of how we are dead to sin, how important this is for our lives as Christians, and how we should appropriate these truths. So first of all, Paul will say that being dead to sin is just a matter of fact. He's not going to tell you to do anything with it. He's just going to tell you how it is. So from verse 3 all the way through verse number 10, he's just going to tell you how it is. If you look in verse number 6, for example, verse number 6 starts with a word. I'm going to count to 3, and I want you to tell me what the word is. What's the first word of verse number 6? 1, 2, 3. Knowing. I want you to know something. I want you to memorize it. I want you to understand it. Backwards and forwards, inside and out, I want you to know this. In the same way that you were taught the addition tables in elementary school and you learned that 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4, and now you know 2 + 2 = 4. You know that. I want you to know this. Christians, I want you to know this. Brad, know it. Joe, know it. John, know it. Know this. Okay, what do I need to know? That our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead, and that's what happens when you're crucified with Jesus, crucifixion equals death. He that is dead is freed from sin. Verse number 10. For in that he, Jesus, died, he died unto sin once, but in that he liveth unto God. Now, what he is going to say from verse number 3 to verse number 10 is that Jesus dies for our sins, is buried, raises from the dead, and now he offers life and liberty to all who will believe. And if we believe on Jesus, we now not only are saved from our sins, but we are now identifying with Jesus in his death, burial, and resurrection. That there is some sort of cosmic unity, some sort of supernatural bonding, some sort of identification that every single Christian has with the Lord Jesus, that in some ways you can say that his death was my death, and his burial was my burial, and his resurrection was my resurrection. Now, I'll explain more of that in just a moment, but think, for example, about marriage. There is a marriage union when two individuals stand at a marriage altar and they take each other as husband and wife. They sign a marriage license to legally bind themselves together. And what happens in this union of these two individuals? Your stuff becomes their stuff, and their stuff becomes your stuff, right? With this ring I thee wed, and all my worldly goods to thee I endow. You get my stuff. Whether it's my student loan debt and my car payment or my savings, right? Our stuff becomes each other's, and then we pledge ourselves to each other that we are going to be there forever and for always. for better, for worse, for richer or poor, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. I am with you to the end, ride or die. You're never getting rid of me. We are here together, right? This marriage union accomplishes that. It's almost as if Paul is saying that when you become a Christian, it's like you and Jesus stand there at a marriage altar and you say, I, sinner, take you, Jesus. And Jesus says, I, Savior, take you, sinner. And you become married. And now what happens is your stuff becomes his stuff. What do I got? Sin, shame, guilt. The law has showed me this. And Jesus says, give it here. I will take your sin. I will take your guilt. I will take your shame. Give it here. And we say, what do you got, Jesus? And he says, I have forgiveness. I have life. I have power. I have a spirit. I have a heavenly home. I have this. And he says, I give you my stuff, right? And then he says, I will be with you forever and always. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. My spirit will be with you always. It's as though there is this union. And you know this. You know that when you're in a good marriage, that union is legal, that union is physical, but that union in some ways is like metaphysical. It's like we bond together in ways that we don't fully know how to explain or articulate. That now Maggie's life is my life. And my life is Maggie's life. And we share in life in ways that I never shared in life with my mother, who I love to pieces. And there's a unique relationship. But there is a union that's different here in ways that I never shared with my brothers. And now our joys become multiplied, our sorrows become divided, because we are married and we begin to think like each other. We begin to be able to predict each other, to just read their face, know how they're feeling. There's this bonding that we can't even fully explain that happens in a good marriage. And in the same way, really, when you are united with Jesus, there is this identification that his death, his burial, his life becomes your death, your burial, your life. And in specific ways, specifically, his death becomes your death and that you die to sin. If you notice what we read in verse number 10, excuse me, not verse number 10, verse number something. That was one of them. That we are now dead, but we're free. We're free from sin. What this means is, if someone is in trial, they got a good defense attorney, but they're in trial, say for whatever, murder, fraud, whatever it is, and they die during the trial, guess what? Trial's over. No one proceeds forward. The defendant is dead. No one is pronouncing a verdict. No one is giving a sentence. There is no post-mortem, hey, we're actually going to slap you with the penalty. If you owe everyone lots of money and you die, guess what? Don't owe anyone any money anymore. You're dead. If you're in prison and you got a 20-year sentence and 10 years in, you die, you don't finish out your sentence because you're dead, right? Death is going to free you from that courtroom, from that trial, from that verdict, from that penalty. And so Jesus dies, but we are crucified with him. We are now dead with him. Dead how? Dead to our sin. Sin can no longer legally point a gun at you. Sin can no longer declare you guilty. Sin can no longer come after you because I'm dead. It also means that your inclination to sin, this, and we'll get into this in a moment, in a deeper way, but your desires to sin, your disposition towards sin has now been fundamentally changed. That it no longer has authority over you. So when you're a child, your parents have authority over you. And mom or dad may say, go to your room. And you're supposed to say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and you're supposed to go to your room, right? How many of you have an older sibling or two? You have older siblings, raise of hands. How many of you keep them up? if you know what it's like for mom and dad to leave and to leave the older sibling in charge, right? We all know this experience. And they think that they're in charge in the same way that mom and dad were in charge. And they try to tell you, go to your room. And what do you say? Yeah, right. Right? You ain't the boss of me. You don't control me. Who do you think you are? Who died and made you president? I'm not doing that. I'm not obeying you. When it says that we are dead to sin, it means that sin used to be the master. Sin used to reign, it said. It used to be in charge. So when it said, hey, come here, you had very little agency. And if you came or not, you had very little control. But now sin is no longer a parent in charge. Sin is now functionally, perhaps, for lack of a better term, your sibling, that when it says, go do this, do that, come here, you should, you can look at sin and say, you ain't the boss of me. Pound salt. You're not in charge of me anymore. I'm dead to sin. You no longer get to reign. Grace reigns in my life. Jesus reigns in my life. It is this fact and this reality that sin does not have to have run of the house anymore. But we also identify with him in his burial. We are buried with him. It starts to mention baptism in verses 3 and 4. We're buried with him. Specifically, our old man is buried. What that means is that old you, right? The one that has all those memories and all those regrets and all those skeletons in the closet, that's buried. If those regrets are buried, don't go digging them up. If those regrets are buried, don't let someone else dig them up. Keep them buried. We are dead to sin, our old man is buried, and we identify with his resurrection and that we're raised to walk in newness of life. When we baptize, we will actually say these words, that we're buried in the likeness of his death, that we're raised in the likeness of his resurrection, or you could say we identify with his death, we identify with his resurrection, we're raised to walk in newness of life. It's one of the many reasons that we baptize by immersion, and if you're new, there's a baptismal back here behind these doors right here, if you wonder where I'm pointing to. We put people in here, we'll do this right after the service. We'll baptize a couple people, and we will do it by immersion because it shows the burial in a liquid tomb and the resurrection. It's a picture of who we are in Jesus. That now his life is our life, and that life is a new life. It's not my old life, and instead of living from regrets in the past, I can live into the hope and the promise of the future and the new life that I have in Jesus. So there's this fact that he gives to us that we identify with Jesus in his death. So being dead to sin it's a matter of fact. But then verse 11, being dead to sin becomes a matter of faith. Now I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank on the second word here, verse number 11. Be ready for it. Likewise, what? Reckon. Now, if you're from the South, I grew up in Kentucky. I reckon was a phrase that I grew up with. If you grew up in Pittsburgh, probably not, you know. Reckon is an accounting word. It's a think it through word and believe it word. You would understand reconciling your bank accounts. It is the idea that you are going to think this through and begin to believe it for yourself. First, he tells you it's fact. Now he's telling you, start to believe it. Start to have this truth sink down into your life. Have it be part of the spiritual marrow in your bones. Breathe this spiritual truth into your lungs and begin to reckon this as true. We all know what it's like to have someone tell us something that's true, but we don't believe it about ourselves, and it feels awkward or like an oversized coat. But what he's doing is saying, this is the truth. Now begin to appropriate this truth in your life and account it as true and believe what God has said about you in Jesus. I don't know if you've ever known someone who's been a part of an abusive relationship. We'll just say maybe verbally abusive. Perhaps you have a friend or a sibling, or perhaps you yourself have been a part of a relationship where On the other side of the relationship, there was a lot of abuse, and there was a lot of you're ugly or you're worthless, or no one would ever want you if you weren't with me, and they just trash you. It doesn't take very long in those relationships for the person who's on the receiving end of that to begin to believe those lies as true, and to begin to feel about themselves that I am worthless, I am ugly, no one else would ever want me, I have to put up with this. And you try to come along to your friend and say, no. What you're believing about yourself does not correspond to reality. You are a beautiful, kind person who deserves so much more than someone trouncing you all the time. And you try to bring them over to the truth, and if you work at it long enough and if they're receptive enough to it, eventually there will come this moment where they start to believe the truth about themselves and begin to dismiss the lies. And all of a sudden there begins to be this sense of agency, that they don't have to put up with this anymore, that they don't have to endure this anymore, that there is something better for them. This begins to grow in them, and kind of a boldness begins to grow in them. Why? Because there was a truth that they needed about themselves that was hard for them to believe, but once they start to believe the truth, it provides them a tremendous amount of agency and freedom. And it is no different for the Christian life, that you can get the truth about you all you want, but until it starts to sink into your bones and you begin to believe that this is actually true and I can have grace reign and sin is my sibling that I don't have to let be the boss of me anymore, if you have to start to believe that. And that's his point, that you have to reckon this true inside of you. A great example of this is Augustine, the early church father from like the 4th century. Augustine, we know a lot about his life. He wrote about his life, and he, before Christianity, had a very sordid past. Augustine was addicted to a lot of things, and to be honest, was just a sex addict. And had all kinds of flings and affairs and all kinds of stuff. And God changed him when he saved him and delivered him from this. And he told the story of an old fling that was a frequent fling, finding him in the marketplace one day, not long after he had converted to Christianity, and coming to him and flirting with him and trying to attract him and attach to him. And he basically paid her no mind and almost acted as if he didn't even know her. And finally, she was kind of beside herself and said, "Augustine, it is I." And Augustine famously replied, "I know, but it is not I." See, Augustine had got to step number 2. He not only knew in a cerebral, theological way that as a Christian he was identified with Jesus and his death was his death and that he was dead to sin, but he began to make it a matter of faith and began to believe it for himself, and it began to change him. So there's this fact that we are dead to sin, then there's the faith that we need to have, we have to reckon it, but then ultimately there is this functionality. Being dead to sin becomes a matter of function, and that's where it picks up in verse number 12, next verse. So with this fact that you now believe, now do something. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that ye should obey it in the lust thereof, neither yield your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin. When it speaks of members, it's talking about your body parts. We would normally just say a body part or something, but we do use the term dismemberment. If you cut off my arm, you dismembered me. That's a member of my body. Now that you know this and believe this, now do not let sin reign. Kick it off the throne. Tell it to go pound salt. It does not have the legal authority to boss you around any longer. Don't obey the lust thereof, and don't yield your members as unrighteousness. But do this, yield yourselves unto God as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. For sin shall not have dominion over you. You're not under law, you're under grace. Verse 18, being then made free from sin, you have become the servants of righteousness. This is saying stop surrendering, stop bowing down. You don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to let sin reign. You can put a new monarch on the throne. You can allow the grace of Jesus to reign. You do not have to bow the knee to your sin. You do have agency. You do have the ability to function this way, and you have to believe that you have the ability to function this way. You have to know this is true and live it out practically. Take your instruments, not as unrighteousness, but as members of righteousness. So, instead of my mind, and I don't know what member would be yours, but if you think about sin not broadly and generically and universally, but you start to think of sin specifically, you will probably begin to pinpoint one or two or three specific sins in your life that you really struggle with, and this may be hard for you to compute because it feels like that sin gets the better of you all the time. Maybe so much that you've stopped trying. I confessed it, gave it up 100 times, it's always come back. So victory is for like super Christians, it's not for me. I'm done trying. Perhaps you just didn't know this. Perhaps you're going about it the wrong way. Whatever that specific sin is that you have, I all but guarantee you, it will be associated with something physical in your life. It could be your brain, that you really struggling living by faith, but you live by fear so frequently. It could be your hands, that I keep typing that in the search bar. I keep looking at that with my eyes. It could be your mouth. I gossip over and over and over and over and over again. I can't help but put the alcohol down my throat. It could be your feet, that you want to just keep going there, or there's this attraction at work and you find yourself walking into their office and saying, "Good morning, how are you doing?" when you know what you're doing. There's probably something specific in your members that manifests itself in this sin, is part of your body to some degree. Don't yield your members in that way, but yield yourself as instruments of righteousness. So functionally what this means, and the best advice that I could give to you, is that you would, like on a daily basis, preferably in the morning when you start your day, although it could be at the end of the day when you end it to segue into the next day, but that you have a moment where you appropriate the truth of God in your life and you yield your members as members of righteousness. What this means is that especially if your prayer life is like either dead or it's just a lot of help me, bless me with God, and there's not much meat to your prayer life, that take a few minutes. I mean, you can do this in probably 3, and stop and begin to pray the truth. God, thank you that you save me. Thank you that grace can reign. Thank you that I can identify with Jesus. I want to thank you that I'm dead to sin. I want to thank you that my old man is buried. I want to thank you that I can walk in newness of life. Even if it doesn't feel that true to you in the moment, pray it anyway. Thank you for this. And today, sin, get off my back. You're not the boss of me. Devil, get out of my life with all your accusations and trying to remind me of my past. My past is buried. I'm not listening to you anymore. And God, today, I'm going to yield myself to you. Take my eyes and help me not only to look at things that are appropriate, but help me to look for people that need you. Help me to look for people that need help. Help me to look for people whose soul is in need of the gospel. God, take this mind and may it be a mind of faith, not of fear today. God, take my tongue and may I speak words not of gossip and not of slander, not of criticism, not of death, but may I speak words of life. Allow me to speak encouragement and honor and gratitude into the world and the lives of those around me today. God, take my ears. I want to listen. I don't want my ears to be a garbage can for other people's sewage. I want my ears to listen to appropriate things. I don't want that music that I like. I like the beat. I like the hook, but the words are so anti-God. I don't want that in here anymore. I want worship music in my ears. Lord, I want my feet to go where they should go. And just walk through your body and say, God, I yield myself to you today, and I believe that this is possible. I believe that you have given me the resources to be able to do this, and you functionally begin to give your body to the Lord and begin to live out of the reality that you, in fact, are dead to sin. And if you will do that, being dead to sin then becomes a matter of fruitfulness. Verse number 22, last verse. Now, being made free from sin, because we're dead to it, and become the servants of God, because I've yielded my members to God, ye have your fruit unto holiness and everlasting life. Do you get the freedom and the fruit in that verse? Free from sin, fruit to holiness. And this is why Paul would say, grace, 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 grace doesn't produce anarchy. Grace, properly understood, means that I'm dead, free from sin, and that I am living a fruitful life unto God. You can have fruitful freedom. Now, I don't think Paul is trying to employ a marketing strategy here, but if there was ever a marketing strategy that I think may work for the church, fruitful freedom sounds like one to me. How many people would sign up for the Fruitful Freedom course? This sounds fantastic. Fruitful freedom. Why? Because we understand that we are dead to sin. Know the truth, believe the truth, live the truth, and all of a sudden you understand I am saved by grace. I am no longer under the law. I am no longer yanked around by my sin all the time. I am free to serve God out of a heart of love. I'll end with this illustration. There's a lot of national holidays nowadays. It seems like every time you turn around, there's a new day. Some are nationally known and recognized by the government, and some, I don't know who starts them, but there's months and weeks and days all over the place. I learned like this weekend that it's Small Business Month, apparently. I didn't know there was a thing, but there is. October is Pastoral Appreciation Month, just a little plug for the pastors at Harvest. It's coming up in not too long. There's weeks, there's days now. There's Sibling Day and Grandparent Day that, confession, me and my wife completely forgot last Grandparents' Day. And sorry, Mom and Nana, we forgot that. There's all these days, Sibling Days, Donut Days, Ice Cream Day. There's probably a day today, I don't know what it is. Anyone know what the day today is? Somebody yell it out if you do. There's probably a day today. Band-Aid Day, whatever. There's days for everything. And typically I roll my eyes at them and like I don't want to participate. I'm not like giving a shout out to my siblings on Sibling Day. I just don't care that much. I just don't. But most recently there was a national federal government recognized holiday that was established just a few years ago, Juneteenth. It's coming up here next month. And I don't know if you know about Juneteenth, how you feel about Juneteenth, but personally, I'm a fan of it. I'm glad that it is a national recognized day now. If you don't know the history of Juneteenth, because I honestly, up until probably 5-6 years ago, knew very little. I don't know what that is. I just didn't. That is the day that freedom became functional, even though it was previously legal. In 1863, President Lincoln declared on January the 1st the Emancipation Proclamation, that there's no more slavery, just freedom. That is morally wrong, it's done. That's January 1 of 1863. Fast forward 2.5 years later, on June the 19th, of 1865, 2,000 Union troops finally had made their way all the way to Galveston, Texas, to let 250,000 slaves in Texas know that this had been declared 2.5 years ago. Because there's not email and there's not social media. Those don't exist. So what was legally true of 250,000 slaves did not become functionally true until 2.5 years later. Juneteenth is now the celebration, basically, that we don't have slavery anymore and a recognition of that in our country. In the same way, when you became a Christian, whether you realized it or not, you were saying, I sinner, take you Jesus, and he was saying, I Savior, take you sinner. And you immediately had an identity with his death, burial, and resurrection. You did. And sin went from being your mom and dad that had the authority to boss you around to no longer having the authority to boss you around anymore. But it may be that for 2 or 10 or 30 years, it's been legally true of you, but functionally not true because you just never really got the news clearly, or maybe you just didn't believe the news. And I am here to tell you that's true. May I, in some way, shape, or form, be the Union troops arriving to your Texas this morning to tell you you're free. Free from law, free from sin, free to live under grace. You are free. And you can live in victory. It's not the apostles could, but us ordinary Christians can't. That's not the way that it's supposed to be. You can actually live it out. And I don't know if you feel that that's true or not. I'm just here to tell you it is true. Whether you feel it or not is beside the point. Whether you feel forgiven or not is beside the point. You are forgiven if you put your faith in Jesus. Whether you feel clean or not, you are clean. And I'm some people that feel forgiven but not clean. Old man's buried, gone, done, new life, clean life. Do not make the mistake of allowing your feelings or what you think could be true or how you feel about the situation or the lies that you've been bombarded with by others, yourself, or the devil to have run of the house and to not believe what God said about you. I know that it sounds very humble to say, I know that God says I'm forgiven, but I just can't forgive myself. It's not humble. It's very haughty. You're saying, I know God says it, but my feelings trump what he says. I know that he says he's forgiven me, but my words and my feelings are the higher court. Listen, you don't get that kind of authority. You are forgiven, clean, redeemed, saved, dead to sin, old man buried, free to live in Jesus, not having sin or the law reign over you, but having grace reign. That's you, and I hope that we can all functionally live this out.